Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. Did you know that Paul and Morgan wrote a book about dating? And because I like to torture myself for you guys, I read it so you don't have to. Spoilers, it's really boring. If you're unfamiliar with Paul and Morgan, I've made a handful of videos about them over the last few years. They are a Christian couple who make videos about the biblical approach to dating, sex, and relationships, and more recently they've branched out to a lot of other topics as well, covering it from a Christian perspective. They usually involve Paul passively aggressively shaming Morgan for not being a virgin when they were married, homophobia, transphobia, calling all child-free and infertile people selfish, denying that overpopulation and pollution are problems, and most recently they posted a quickly deleted racist rant about how there are just too many interracial couples in the new Lord of the Rings TV show. Oh my god. Yeah, no, so Paul didn't care about a human and an elf having a flirt, but he did care that only one of those actors was black. Apparently, in his words, it's okay to have minorities represented in TV shows, but not too many, and only as long as they know their place. Yeah, Paul and Morgan, great people. Great. It's absolutely ridiculous. Back in 2019, which is actually longer ago than I care to admit, but not so long ago that this isn't still relevant, Paul and Morgan wrote a book called Intentional Dating. Your need-to-know questions answered. The cover is hilarious because it features these cartoons of them. I have to say, this does look quite a bit like Morgan. This is pretty accurate, I think it's great. But there is no way in hell this resembles Paul. No. Wishful thinking there, mate. The opening page also contains this horrific formatting. And yes, that's an image, so this was intentional. Why did they do this? Why? So obviously I was immediately aggravated as soon as I opened the ebook. Just before we jump into the bulk of this video, let's take a moment for some shameless self-promotion. You may have seen over on Instagram, I have been painting beetles recently. I am obsessed with beetles for some reason. I've been painting lots and lots of watercolour ones, and if you like insects, beetles, watercolour paintings, you can get prints of these two beauties over in my print store right now at rachlots.uk/shop, or if you want to get these on merch, I have these available either as single large prints on t-shirts and hoodies, or on t-shirts I have a really cool all over print of both of these beetles. You can get the green one, the blue one. I love them both. I'm really excited for these designs. These were so much fun to paint, they were so much fun to make, and then putting them onto the merch and coming up with the designs, I loved it. I had so much fun with it. So if you'd like to get those, they're available over in my print store and on my merch store now. The links will be down in the video description. They'll also be on screen, floating around at some point here, so you can check them out if you want. And also, second little thing is you may have seen, or maybe not, because it's not really had a big audience yet, but I've just released my first ever spoken word poetry video. I say first ever, I put a couple out on Patreon that were just kind of like testing the waters, seeing what it was like and getting a little bit of feedback and stuff. But this is my first ever like properly recorded performance type one, and it's for a poem of mine called Room, which is about my choice to be child-free, and also just about sort of like the reproductive rights of women and everyone who was assigned female at birth, basically everyone with a uterus, and how a lot of people try and control us, shame us, and all these different factors, and ultimately how it's our choice and we shouldn't be shamed into doing anything we don't want to do with our bodies, and kind of at the end coming to accept that this is my body, I love it, and it's mine to do with what I want. So I've released a poem about that. It is called Room. You can go watch it now. It's about 4.5 minutes long. This is the poem that I performed at Glastonbury this year, so it's a really, really special one to me, and it's one that I think is a really important message. So I would love if you want to go watch it, check it out, tell me what you think, and if you like it, it would be wonderful if you were to share it around on social media and stuff like that, and yeah, I appreciate it all, thank you. I also have 2 more poetry videos coming out over the next few weeks. The other 2 are a lot shorter, they're slightly more personal, but again, I'm very excited but very nervous to share them with you, so if you want to see those, please subscribe and you'll get a notification, hopefully, when they're released. And I think that's everything. So, let's jump back into the book. So the preface of this book begins with a nice little straw man, and in this respect it's very reminiscent of Girl Defined's book about dating called Love Defined, which I have a video series reviewing in depth if you want to go check it out for yourself. I'll link that playlist down in the video description. So Paul and Morgan decided to open this book by complaining about what they think everyone else who isn't them thinks about dating. Except this isn't what everyone thinks, so it's just bizarre. Like Girl Defined, they build it up in their heads that anyone who has even a slightly different approach to them has this exact approach that they've just made up and deemed completely bad, no good, horrible. They absolutely fail to realize that everyone is different and that there's no one approach to dating, and that there's no one approach that's just taught to everyone who isn't Christian, you know? Everyone takes different approaches to everything in life, including dating, and for a lot of people, their own approaches do change over time, depending on what they want, what they're looking for, what they value, what they've learned, what they understand about themselves, and that's absolutely okay. There really isn't one right or wrong way to approach dating or anything, really. They open back. I want to say they. I'm pretty sure Morgan wrote like 80% of this book, and every so often Paul puts in like a little side note, but it's mostly Morgan's work that he takes most of the credit for, who I assume is Morgan, writes, "The casual approach to dating has left so many young people asking the question, how did I get in this mess? Physical boundaries are being crossed. Hearts are getting broken. We're here to show you a better way, a God-honouring way. Our culture likes to say, it's only dating, so you don't need a plan. If it feels right, go for it. Don't put boundaries on your fun. There are no mistakes, only experiences. However, we've seen time and time again how this line of thinking so easily leads to unseen pain, regret, and compromise." Yeah. No. The problem with this argument is that it's the same problem that people have when they say things like, feminism's bad because it forces people to work. It's all just a blatant misunderstanding. I would say that today, more people who give relationship advice would say there's no one right way to date. And I include myself in this because I make a lot of videos on this topic and I say this stuff. And so I and others would say, if you want to have a plan, that's absolutely okay. And if you don't, that's absolutely okay too. And if you want to be somewhere in the middle, that's also okay. If you'd like incredibly strict boundaries in dating, that's great. If you'd like broader boundaries, that's great too. The important thing is you communicate what they are with your partner. It's not, don't have any boundaries, don't, stop it, remove those boundaries. No one's saying that. It's saying everyone has boundaries, everyone needs boundaries, it's just up to you how strict or broad they are, and it's your responsibility to communicate them with your partner. It's the same with the feminism approach. And this is what I mean. A lot of people like Paul and Morgan like to say feminism forces women to work. It doesn't. Feminism says all women should have the same access to opportunities as men. So if you want to work, you can do. If you want to stay at home, you can do. Simple as that. When it comes to this kind of advice about dating and relationships where we say it's okay if you want to have these boundaries or these or these or these, all we're simply doing is not shaming people for approaching dating in a way that works for them. That is not the same as telling people they can only take a casual approach to dating. They have to take a casual approach. That's not what anyone's doing, and Paul and Morgan don't seem to understand this distinction, and it creates a fundamental flaw in their entire work, and that is a problem. Chapter 1 of their book asks, am I ready to start dating? Which is, of course, a very important question, and one that many people will ask at various stages of their life. Paul and Morgan open with the line, we believe dating is for the ultimate purpose of finding a spouse. Okay, good for you. But that doesn't mean it has to be the same purpose for everyone. It is absolutely okay to date with the intention of finding a long-term partner and building a life with them. But it's also okay to date with other intentions too, with the intention of meeting new people, having fun, developing intimate connections with people, developing physical relationships with people, discovering more about yourself, or any other reason you want. The only, I guess, hard and fast rule is make sure you communicate your intentions to your partner or potential partner or partners, because that's how you make sure you don't hurt anyone. Being open and honest in your communication is pretty much the only hard and fast rule there is. Please do not let Paul and Morgan or anyone like them shame you into thinking there's only one reason to do something or anything, whether that's dating or anything else in your life. I think the worst part is that even though this was 3 years ago, they're still spouting this stuff today, but worse. Here's a clip of Paul saying there's no point in getting married if you don't want to have children. It's really bad, really offensive.
I would say wisdom, in my perspective, would be you don't get married if you feel like you're going to be a bad, if you, which I think some people just use that as an excuse. I just am not very good with kids. I just don't think I'm going to be. But it's like, if you know I am just horrible and completely unqualified to be a parent, why are you pursuing a relationship? Why are you getting married?
That's interesting.
They go on to write that too many jump in prematurely. All my friends are in relationships. If I had a boyfriend, I wouldn't feel lonely. Having a girlfriend would be so much fun. Sure, dating is fun, but fun shouldn't be the primary goal. Because we all know Paul and Morgan are the fun police. But why not? Why shouldn't fun be the goal? What's so bad about fun? Again, there's no shame in wanting to have fun or actually having fun and that being your only goal, as long as that's what you're communicating to your partner and they're on the same page. Don't go into something just looking to have casual fun if you know your partner wants like marriage and kids out of this. That's not fair on either of you, because neither of you are going to get what you want. Someone or both of you are going to get hurt. But you communicate, you find someone with the same intentions and goals as you. All good. What is the problem? They write, why get into dating relationships when you can't imagine yourself getting married for 5 more years? Seriously though, where is that going to lead? To you not being married in 5 years and having the life that you want? Is that a bad thing? Literally, like all the reasons I just listed above, there are reasons to date without it having to lead to marriage. For fun, getting to know someone, learning about other people, learning about yourself, enjoying physical intimacy, to love and be loved, to care for other people, to build a life with someone even if that doesn't end in marriage. There are so many reasons. I'm sure you can think of plenty more. In fact, please let me know them down in the comments if you can. They write, ask yourself, what is my motivation to date? Am I ready for something serious? Am I in a good place spiritually, emotionally, and even financially? Absolutely. Great questions to ask yourself. Yes, I can't fault these, but I don't like the implication that there's only one right answer to them. There's absolutely no right or wrong to these, but you do have to know what your own answers are to determine how you date and how you communicate your intentions to others. For example, if your motivation is to get to know some people and have fun, don't go and tell your date that, yeah, I'm ready for marriage and kids in the next 2 years, because that's not actually your intention. You're just leading someone on. It's not going to end well for either of you. Honesty with yourself and with your partner is what's important. They're right, still you should be in a stable place and able to see yourself getting married in the near future should you find the right person. I absolutely disagree. I think it's very, very natural for every human being to crave connection with others in some way, whether that's a romantic connection, a platonic connection, or like whatever. And how long those connections last and what kind they are will differ for everyone and differ for people at different points in their lives. Not everyone wants to get married, and that's okay. Not everyone wants monogamy, and that's okay. Not everyone wants a sexual relationship at any point, and that's okay. Not everyone wants a romantic relationship at any point, and that's okay. All of it is okay. Sometimes people will want to date others just to satisfy their need for company or sexual desire or any other reason, and that is okay. Monogamous marriage with kids does not have to be the end goal for every person, and dating is not exclusively saved for those who want that. I know I might be repeating myself at this point, but I think it's a very important point to get across, and I just want to make sure that my audience and the people who need to hear this do. Because there's so much shaming content out there from the likes of Paul and Morgan and others that I think sometimes people can internalize that without even realizing it. And sometimes hearing someone else say, what you want is okay, it's normal, you can pursue that, is exactly what people need. Chapter 2 is titled, Where Do I Find Someone? Brackets, the singles at my church are strange. Speak for yourself, guys. They said, let's start with the short list of obvious places to meet a quality guy or girl. Your church, mutual friends, a campus ministry. They're the obvious ones, are they? Okay, yeah, okay. Campus ministries are often teeming with Christian singles. Each week you get to be around people in similar stages of life. It's a natural place for relationships to form. A little known secret is, even after you graduate, you can still make guest appearances at events, parties, and worship nights. Not that I, Paul, have ever done this. This absolutely just reads as, you, a grown adult, hopefully with a job, who has graduated, should absolutely go and prey on someone younger and more naive than you, since no one your own age wants you. Can't find other adults to date? Here are some barely legal teenagers. It's really bad. And let's be honest, Paul has definitely done this, and definitely in a creepy way, you know? There are other recommendations too, like go to a new church, try a dating app, but never ever ever go to bars or clubs ever. No, stop it, no. Overall, a little creepy, but not the worst section in the book. Although there are lots of creepy little bits that Paul puts in here at different points. I get very Roosh v. Andrew Tate vibes. So a little later he writes, this is so Roosh v. Stop overthinking things and just ask girls out. I did. I asked out girls I'd been friends with for a while, and girls I only barely knew. I asked out girls who were mutual friends on Facebook, who I'd never even met. I'm not suggesting that you ask out every Christian girl that you see, but I'm not saying not to. Wink, wink. It's creepy and desperate and slightly predatory. And I can absolutely imagine Paul doing that. Like, he has like a template of a message like, hey, hi, you seem like a good Christian girl. Want to go out with me? And then he just copies and pastes it to everyone on his like friend of friends list on Facebook. I'm sorry. I could just imagine it. Can you? Can you imagine it, gorgeous? Oh, stolen the baby. I've stolen the baby. Oh, baby wants the tummy rubs. Baby wants the tummy rubs. Jumping forward a little bit in this book, and chapter 6 is titled, Can Opposites Attract and Work Long Term? And Nadine, what do you think? You and Paul are quite opposite. No, you're not. You're very similar. You're both very round, aren't you? Yes. My little podgy one. They write, answer these questions to find out. Do you love God? Does the other person love God? Are you both going to put God at the centre of your relationship? If you answered yes to those 3 questions, we believe it can absolutely work. Expect challenges, of course, but challenges can be good things that refine us. My mum always told me that it doesn't matter how different 2 people are, if they have God in the centre of their relationship, they will be just fine. I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with you and your mum and this whole idea. People need so much more to make a relationship work and be successful than just a shared religion. And as I've spoken about in other videos, you can absolutely have different religions and different beliefs in God and still have a happy, successful, functional relationship. It's way more important to share other goals and values apart from your religious beliefs, you know? And I'm not saying that everything has to align and that you 2 have to be identical. It's absolutely great to bring different perspectives and different backgrounds and different approaches to stuff in a relationship. But as individuals, you need to know, what are your core values? What do you value most? What can you and what can't you compromise on with a partner? So for me, one of my core values is that I don't ever want children. And so it's really important for me in finding a partner that I was with someone who doesn't want children either. But there were other things that I had like a preference for, but weren't deal breakers. Like I was like, I quite like someone who's creative like me, but not a deal breaker, just a preference. Still found it. But there are other things as well where like I can be complete opposites with someone and it not really be a problem as long as they aren't core values for both of us, you know? So like I am a little bit of a, let's say, not so tidy, slightly disorganized person. Let's just say my home is very lived in. It's not dirty, it's not necessarily messy, it's just, I like to say, differently organized. I like to have things on display. I have half-finished projects that I'm working on, kind of like accessible and stuff like that. Whereas my partner is very, very neat and tidy. You know, his home is like very much everything has a place. And I actually, like, I've said to him before, I'm like, is this something you're okay with? Can you cope with this? You don't feel uncomfortable in my home, do you? Is this okay? And he's like, no, it's great. I like it. It's all good. And it doesn't bother him at all. But I think if the neatness was like a core value for him, this could be an issue. Because this was one of the things that, like, towards the end of me breaking up with Dan, or rather towards the end of the relationship, as I was thinking about breaking up with Dan, this was one of the things that kind of became a bit of a problem, because he would be annoyed with me for, like, you know, leaving paintings out to dry, or he would be annoyed at me for, like, painting on the coffee table because it looked a mess and made a mess and all this sort of thing. And he didn't really like me having stuff around. He was always making me put things away in cupboards, and it was just very, very stifling for me, and I felt like I wasn't able to, like, do any of my hobbies. And I stopped doing things like taking photos or painting or anything much, really. At least definitely not as often as I wanted, because he'd get stressed by it and he didn't like it, and he was always kind of like, he didn't like my untidiness, I guess you could say. And it caused problems for us because I felt very stifled and he felt like he was constantly telling me to clean up. And that was an issue because I guess like that was a core value for him, but not so much for me. This is a really silly thing, but I think it's important. And what I'm saying is like, it's not so much the similarities or differences in general that matter, but making sure that you identify the important ones to you and that you align on them. Does that make sense, Coops? Am I just rambling here? Yes, am I rambling? What do you think? Love you. Another core value would be that I love you, and you're the center of my world, aren't you? Yes. And so I needed to find someone who would love you as much as me. And we have, haven't we? Yes, we have. Yes, we have. All right there, Leanie girl. Someone who's indifferent to dogs, it's never going to work long term for me, is it? For us. Is there a package? So Morgan writes, Paul and I have witnessed this firsthand. We're definitely similar in a lot of ways. We agree on the big things in life. Both of our hearts belong to God. We're both goofy and quirky. They're the big things? Okay, I mean, that's what works for you. However, we're also very different. I've luckily got to a point where I can read Paul's mind/body language pretty well. That doesn't mean it makes it easier for me to understand why he's thinking or feeling a certain way. It actually just drives me nuts because it's so hard for me to understand how Paul's brain works. I know it's the same for him with me. We're still figuring it all out. Sure, we fight, we have disagreements, but God always brings us back to him. He humbles us and brings us to a place of vulnerability with one another to take a place of repentance. I'm going to be honest, I don't think this sounds the healthiest or the most fun. If you're constantly arguing about the little basic things, doesn't sound great. Like, I can't imagine staying with someone for so long and marrying someone who you say you don't understand and who being around drives you nuts. Just kind of sounds miserable, doesn't it? They also warn not to text each other too much because some people, often a bit older and quite eager for marriage, might move really fast in every aspect of their dating relationships. Then they're married in 6 weeks. If the idea of marriage at 6 weeks makes you squirm, my advice for early on would be to limit your texting and phone calls to an amount in which you're not thinking about the person all day, every day. Just so bizarre, I don't really know how to comment on it. Like, what am I supposed to even say to that? Some of their advice is just very oddly aggressive. For example, you can't go pouring your guts out after the second date telling someone how much you're in love with them. Which seems fair, except you will scare off the person, most likely, and then you'll be single. Again, you have to learn how to keep your cute little mouth shut until the Lord has given you the okay to release those feelings. Why does this feel so aggressive and like it was written by the mean girls at school? Don't tell your readers to keep their cute little mouths shut. It's unnecessarily rude and aggressive and patronising, which honestly is what we've come to expect from Paul and Morgan, but it's still horrible to read. Isn't it, Coop? You're grumbling under the table. Chapter 10 is titled, Should I Tell the Person About Past Sexual Sins? And if so, how and when? They write, if you see yourself marrying the person you're with, then he or she deserves to know about your past. I'm not saying you have to go into details or anything, but it's only right to let them know they are not going to be your first. I have mixed feelings about this advice. I don't hate it. I do think it's important to be with your partner about who you are, what you like, what you expect from them and everything, especially when it comes to the physical side of relationships. It is important not to lie to your partner. What I don't like is when they continue on with this bit that says, it's so shaming. Here's the thing though, you have repented, you have been forgiven, you are clean by the blood of Christ. God has made a new thing out of you, and your person will surely see that as well. Either way, you should never feel shamed or condemned, because again, you're a new creation. But they say this, you only shouldn't feel ashamed if you've repented for having sex, if you've asked forgiveness for having sex, if you've already felt shame for having sex and now you've asked to be fixed, only then can you not feel ashamed. If you've just had sex and enjoyed it, then yes, shame on you. How dare you enjoy that outside of marriage? How dare you? No. I just hate this whole narrative. You should never feel shamed or condemned in the first place, because you have nothing to be ashamed of. You have nothing to repent for. Being human and having sex is a perfectly normal thing for so many people. Regardless of if you choose to wait any length of time for sex or you don't, regardless of the number of sexual partners you've had or not had, there's no sin there. There's nothing to be ashamed of, there's nothing to repent for, there's nothing to ask your partner to forgive you for or to confess to them. As long as you've always been safe and the sex has always been consensual, there's nothing to feel bad about at all. Chapter 11 follows on from this, and it's titled, How Do I Accept His or Her Past? We've all thought about it. You're sitting at a table in a coffee shop with your person, and he tells you he isn't a virgin. I haven't thought about that. You're not sure how to respond or how to feel. I get it. It's a hard thing to hear, especially if you've been saving everything for your spouse. Not really. Kind of expect it. Morgan then tells a story of how when she was 17, she dated a guy who was a few years older, kind of gives me Predator vibes, but okay, and shock horror, he wasn't a virgin. And she says they needed to set boundaries because I didn't want to tempt him and I didn't want to fall into temptation myself. So it's subtle, but notice how in typical Fundie fashion, all the responsibility for sexual purity lies with Morgan, the woman. She needed to make sure that she wasn't tempted, and she needed to make sure that she didn't tempt him. There's nothing about him having to make sure he doesn't tempt her. There's nothing about him being in control of his own desires and emotions and actions. It's all on her. But then here's an example of how they never bother to explain anything useful to their audience. Let's say you're a young person reading this book and you decide you do want to wait to have sex, whether that's until marriage or not. Morgan here tells them to set boundaries so you don't tempt him, and then that's it. They just leave it. They don't explain what these boundaries might look like, how to have these conversations, what do boundaries actually mean, and they don't explain why it's necessary to have boundaries with your partner, whether they're strict or broad. They don't say how it's also okay to adapt or change those boundaries over time if they aren't working for you. This book is just very, very low effort. There's not much to it. It's very lazy. Then there's a mention of Morgan having to tell Paul that she wasn't a virgin when they met, but they never actually talk about what that conversation was like or how Paul actually reacted to it. They don't give any details at all. Instead, Paul just says, it can be difficult for certain individuals who have been saving themselves to get over the news that someone has compromised their sexual purity. Though I and many others are given grace to keep pursuing a relationship like this, for some, it's not so easy. So they don't actually bother to share any real personal experiences here, or at least Paul doesn't. Like experiences that might help someone, that might help them understand. Paul implies that I think he actually found it very, very difficult and he's just refusing to admit to it. It gives the vibes of like, some people might find it hard. Not I, but some people. Others. Some people might think you're a dirty, disgusting whore. Not me. No, that's what they're saying, not what I'm saying. Some people might never get over this and keep bringing it up for the next 6 years. And I will remind you of what these other people might be thinking every single day. Not what I think, it's what they think. It gives me those vibes. All kind of jokes aside though, like, knowing what Paul is like publicly, I get a lot of red flags from him, and I've spoken about this before. And so because of that, I'm genuinely curious to read his side of this story. I would really, really like to know what happened and what his reaction was. I'd like to read this, and they just never bothered to put it in or explain it or anything. And this is the one thing that I'm genuinely interested in, because knowing what his values are, it must have been really, really hard for him to deal with this. So how did Morgan tell him? What was his first reaction? When did he decide he would be okay with it? Why did he decide that? How long did it take him to come to this decision? What sort of things were going through his mind? No snark, I'm genuinely interested in this stuff. But they don't bother to go into any of it, because I'd be interested in hearing Morgan's side of this story as well, because she said in this section how at 17 she decided to save herself until marriage to have sex. But then by the time she met Paul, she'd gone on to have sex with someone else, and then decided it was the wrong choice for her, and then to wait until marriage again. So instead of her just saying, yeah, it's better to wait, that's all, I didn't, wish I had, done, because that's all she ever says in this book. I do wish they'd explored this a little bit more, because I genuinely like to understand Morgan's experiences, her motives, why she came to this decision, why she changed her mind, like once and then again. And I think it's something that a lot of young people in particular could actually learn something from, but they just don't bother to include it at all. They don't go into any depth. They don't really analyze their own actions, and it makes for a very bland, very low effort book. And like I said, this is the recurring theme with the book. It's all very bare minimum. Each chapter is like a page and a half long. Paul's sections are like 3 lines long and the most low effort of all. Morgan's sections are more frequent, but just very bizarre. She regularly uses like smiley faces and winky faces and just puts like lol in big letters halfway through a paragraph. It's not what you'd expect from a non-fiction book. It's all very, very odd. Chapter 12 is titled, What's the Difference Between a Flaw and a Red Flag? And they write, you've been dating someone for a while now and you like them a lot, but you're starting to notice some things come up. You realise their personality isn't as amazing as you thought it was. How do you know when it's time to just move on because this could get toxic? Genuinely good questions, important ones. It's one thing to start seeing a person's flaws, it's another to notice a person might have harmful tendencies. One way to tell between a flaw and a harmful behaviour is to seek opinions from the people around you. That's great, okay, I like that bit. But the examples of red flags they give, if you notice the guy you're dating is physically aggressive, doesn't take no for an answer, or just doesn't respect boundaries, get out of there. This is not what a godly relationship looks like. Excellent, very good advice, wonderful. However, in women, red flags are a little different apparently. If you notice your girlfriend is extremely hostile, doesn't trust you even though you've given her no reason to, or she continues to push to be the leader and cannot respect the biblical roles in dating and marriage, get out of there. Now I'm sorry, but I don't think physical aggression and sometimes she wants to be the leader are comparable. They're not as serious or bad as each other at all, and I think it's incredibly disrespectful to imply that they are. They also say that another red flag is if they don't get on with their family. Another way you can tell between a flaw and a red flag is by spending time with their family. Pay close attention to how they are treating the family. Is Bobby really sweet to his mum and sisters? Is he kind and respectful to his father? Does Susie help her mum with the dishes after eating? Does she honour her father and abide by his rules? Or does Bobby talk trash about his mum, yell at his sisters, and just cause an all-out war with his father? Does Susie disrespect her mum, raise her voice at her father, and slam doors with a nasty attitude? Listen, it might sound silly, but these can all be signs of exactly how they will treat you when you get married, and they're comfortable enough to show you their true colours. You really have to pay attention to the details in their lives, which I do kind of get in some way, because it comes back to the whole question of, well, how do they treat others? But I don't think a person's relationship with their family is the only measure of that, because some people have very good reasons not to be close with their family or not to get on with their family, and on the other hand, I think there are some people who refuse to stand up to family who are being mean or unfair or treating them badly or treating their partners badly, and I think Paul and Morgan don't bother to consider either of those things. I guess I'd say I encourage you to look more broadly at how they treat other people in general. So for me, one of the earliest red flags with my abusive ex that I wish I'd paid more attention to was there was this one night when we ordered a takeaway and it wasn't so great, and we ordered it through Deliveroo, so we just put in a little complaint on the app, and we'd ordered through my account, and so Johnny then ended up taking my phone and used my account to berate the customer service team, not even at the place where the food was from, but just the place we delivered it through. And he went so far as to start swearing at them and calling them names, and he called them all the C word and all sorts of horrible things, and I was so completely embarrassed, and I took the phone off him and I tried to apologise profusely afterwards to the customer service team, but it was just awful and embarrassing and cruel and unfair, and I wish I paid more attention to that. But he was always nice to his parents' faces, but he didn't actually treat them so well. He could be aggressive at times. He would absolutely take advantage of his mum's generosity and kindness and stuff, and there'd be times when he'd be aggressive, or he'd take his parents' car and drive it while he was drunk or high, and then get mad at me when I told him not to do that, or when I told his parents about it so they could like limit his access to the car when he'd taken those substances. And yeah, so the point is, you can't just look at how someone interacts with their family and get a whole picture of it. You have to look at how they treat people in general. I just think they have a far too narrow view. Paul and Morgan, I mean. And then this chapter ends with a note from Morgan, who says, Paul and I have flaws. What? I know, it's shocking, winky face. When we started dating, our flaws came out very quickly because we were so intentional about asking the uncomfortable question. It was not easy to start seeing all these things that weren't necessarily attractive coming out of the person you're attracted to. But in the end, our flaws have helped each other grow. Okay, maybe tell us more about that. Tell us, how did you overcome those things? Were there compromises? What were they? Who made the compromises? How do you bring up these issues with each other? How do you talk about these things? How do you share these flaws? Why did you decide it was better to continue dating someone who had these things you didn't like and who you said drives you nuts than find someone who's a better fit for you? Why did you come to that decision? These are the things I want to know. These are things I think would be helpful, but instead they just have these low effort, oh my god, we're like totally flawed too, barely full sentences. Chapter 13 is how do I set physical boundaries without sounding like a jerk? What should those be and when should we set them? Okay, so remember when I said about wishing they'd gone into more detail with this stuff? Well, brilliant. This chapter sounds like it's finally going to deliver on that, and yet it still manages to fall short. They said, hopefully you're dating a person who is wanting the same thing that you're wanting, to stay pure before marriage. No, hopefully you're dating someone who's looking for the same thing as you and has the same goals and values as you. That is all. It doesn't matter what that goal is. It doesn't matter what those values are, as long as you align. That's the important thing. When the conversation of setting boundaries comes up, it won't be incredibly challenging for either of you, although there might be things you don't totally agree on. Maybe you think you shouldn't hold hands until you're engaged, but they don't think that's necessary. Maybe they don't want to kiss until the wedding day, but you think kissing is fine while dating. I think what they're trying to say here, or at least what I hope they're trying to say, but doing a bad job of it, is that even if you think you both want the same thing or have the same ultimate goal, it's still very, very important to communicate with your partner openly, without shame or fear or judgment. Talk about what you both hope to get out of the relationship, no matter how long or short term that is. Talk about what you're comfortable with physically and emotionally. Talk about what your boundaries are and why they're there. Talk about what you're not comfortable with doing yourself and what you're not comfortable with your partner doing, and so on. Talk about all the little details without embarrassment, without shame, because it's okay. They say whatever your differences might be, you need to be considerate towards one another. Absolutely agree. Spot on. I think they're completely right there. I would say that whoever has the strongest conviction on a certain boundary is the one whose boundary should be set out of respect for that person and for God who gave them that conviction. This is where they lose me, because I think this sounds so potentially dangerous. And to see why, let's have a look at the example that Paul and Morgan give. Bear with me, we're going to come back around to why this can be dangerous. Morgan writes, Paul and I had the conversation on boundaries in the first week of knowing each other. I just assumed that kissing, hugging and holding hands was going to be totally acceptable. Boy, was it a big surprise when he told me that he wasn't going to hold my hand until he felt like our relationship was going to lead to marriage. He wasn't going to kiss me until he asked my parents' permission to marry me, and he would only hug me minimally. After that was revealed, I straight up told him, well, I don't think I'm your girl. Sorry, I don't think we should talk anymore. He didn't give up that easily. He quickly said, no, that's not true. Please don't say that. I just want to make sure that I honor and respect you and your future husband if that's not me. How could I argue with that? So, Morgan goes on to explain that how Paul had the stronger convictions, and instead of actually being able to follow through with her saying, no, this isn't right for me and leaving, she just has to go along with his boundaries, even though it's not what she thought was right for her. Now I get it. It was still Morgan's choice, and in some ways this isn't so bad because Morgan just had to compromise on not doing something. But let's say it was the other way around. Let's say the stronger convictions were, well, I need to do X physical thing to honor God or show my love or any excuse they want to come up with, and the other person isn't comfortable with doing that. By Paul and Morgan's rule of the one with stronger convictions is the one who sets the boundaries, that could be potentially really dangerous for the person who is being forced to have broader boundaries than they're comfortable with. Does that make sense? So, by Paul and Morgan's logic, if one person is like, well, I need to do X thing for this reason, and the other person says, I'm not comfortable with it, the second person just needs to get over that and allow first person to do whatever they want, I quote, out of respect for that person and for God, because they have, and again I quote, stronger convictions. In reality, that's just really, really wrong. You should never have to do something you're not comfortable with. So instead of Paul and Morgan's advice of whoever has the stronger convictions sets the boundaries, I would say the healthier and safer bit of advice is when it comes to compromising and setting boundaries, it's important that you each make sure all of your core needs are met without either of you having to do something that makes you uncomfortable. If you can't set a boundary that leaves you both fulfilled and completely comfortable, then maybe you just aren't compatible and it's absolutely okay to go your separate ways. But you both need your needs and your level of comfort to be fulfilled. And it's interesting because in the next part of the story, Morgan talks about how her needs were very different to Paul's and how she ended up completely compromising for him. And while it's absolutely okay for Paul to have these boundaries of things he absolutely did not want to do, that is absolutely fine, I also think Morgan had the right idea in the first place by wanting to break up. And I think that's what I would have done in her situation, because as you can see, she ended up very uncomfortable and not having her needs met by Paul. So she writes, as Paul and I's relationship progressed, I needed reassurance that he liked me as much as I liked him, because my love language was physical touch. When he was not hugging or kissing me, I needed him to confirm his feelings for me in a different way and tell me with his words. That's what your person might need to do as well. Come up with other ways to show the person you really care for them, you love them, get creative, don't compromise. And things like needing physical touch as confirmation of feelings isn't going to be something that's essential for everyone, but it will be for some. And it's okay if you need to go and find someone else to fulfill that need for you. You shouldn't feel ashamed of that. You shouldn't have to compromise if you don't want to. You can if you want, but you don't have to. You need to remember that there's no right or wrong way to be in any of this, but there are people you are and aren't compatible with. And it's okay to admit that you're not compatible with someone. For example, it's absolutely okay to be a completely asexual person. It's also okay to be a hypersexual person, and it's okay to be anywhere in between. But it would likely be unfair on both of you if one of you was asexual and one of you was hypersexual, because neither would be having their needs completely fulfilled or their boundaries completely respected. Sometimes just because you can compromise, that doesn't mean you should, and it's okay to say, hey, I don't think we're right, and move on. They then go on to give ideas on specific boundaries, which aren't too bad, but they're just a little funny to me. No holding hands until you're official, no kissing until engagement, side hugs and short front hugs only, hands above the waist, below the chest, but no face touching. Got ya, right, below the chest. So tummies are good, but no face. No face, only tummies, got ya. No touching knees either, knees are bad. Don't lie down in bed together. Ladies, don't sit in the guy's lap, but guys, you're totally cool to sit on hers, that's fine, don't worry. Never be alone together for more than 2 hours. There are so many stories about their relationship that they tell that just sound really unhealthy. This one in particular made me quite uncomfortable reading it for reasons which I'll explain afterwards. I told Paul that I loved him first. You know what he said? I think I feel the same way too, but I'm not totally sure. Stop right now. Let me tell you what, I did not prepare my heart for that response. So the crash landing I talked about with you guys, yeah, I had one of those. I crashed right into a bed of rocks and my little wings were shattered for about an hour. He then apologized and was like, I don't know why I said that, I do love you, I know I love you, I'm sorry. And then all of a sudden my wings were healed and I was flying off to Loveland with my man. Lol. This reminds me a lot of Johnny. And I've spoken before about the abusive relationship I was in. He was physically and emotionally abusive, but there was this one moment, no, it wasn't even a moment, it was a whole thing, it was a whole drama. He literally had me in tears after I told him I loved him for the first time, and not happy tears, because he refused to say it back, and he got really mean, and he got angry, and he pushed me away, and he was like, he accused me of using saying I loved him as a way to manipulate him. And he got angry and he started a big argument and he threw things around like he always did. And then a few hours later he came back and was like, no, I do love you, Rachie, I do, of course I love you. And after that he kind of used love as almost like a bargaining tool, but I was always walking on eggshells with him. I never really knew where I actually stood. And he was always swinging backwards and forwards on his feelings, and it was like he was playing with me, he was playing games with me constantly. And I still don't think he ever really loved me at all. I think it was all fake. Again, I think he was just using it as like a manipulation tool. And, you know, he'd be like, oh, like, you know, you're lucky that I love you. No one else will want you. No one else will love you. Only I love you. You know, that sort of thing. And 1 hour, I'd be like the love of his life and he'd never met anyone like me and I was the best person he knew. And then the next, I'd be like an effing rat and a stupid bitch and he was telling me he was going to kill me. And it was always, you know, swinging backwards and forwards. It was weird, like the love bombing stages made me feel so special and loved, And then in the bad stages, he'd tell me that no one else would ever want me and that all of the issues in our relationship were my fault and mine to deal with and fix and change. And when you constantly hear it, you start to believe it. And so this is what I'm reminded of every time I hear stories about Paul and Morgan and their relationship. And this idea of like Morgan telling him that he loved him and then Paul being like, oh, I don't know. And then like upsetting her and then coming away and be like, oh no, actually I do. I think I do. It just reminds me a little of Johnny and his constantly swinging, not even emotions, but his swinging approach to me and constantly walking on eggshells and never really knowing where you stand, and like it just reminds me of that stuff, you know? In chapter 17, Morgan decides to write some very vague stuff about biblical submission, a topic which we have covered a lot in past videos. It's so weird because like she often, like, well, I say often, in this book there are a few bits where she'll like quote from the Bible and stuff, but it's very clear she doesn't really have a full understanding of the Bible as a whole and the context of a lot of what she's saying, and it feels just like she's parroting extracts that she's heard from other people rather than understanding this stuff herself. But, you know, there are some things that worry me, like this whole section from Morgan. I agree, Kyra, I do. If a woman is truly walking with the Lord, she will know the times that are best for her to speak up and the times to just keep quiet and let her man figure things out. This is very challenging for me sometimes. Knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet does not come easy. When Paul and I are driving and he decides to take the very long route to a location, or he just isn't paying attention to what he's doing, I so desperately want to speak up and correct him, and sometimes I do, hee hee. But in reality, if it's only 2 minutes longer, or we're not in any actual danger, I just need to learn to keep my mouth shut and let him do his thing. It's a learning process, honestly. We'll probably still be learning on our deathbed, but hey, at least we've grown. As a woman, I'm learning exactly what it means to let the man lead. And yeah, I'll be honest, I don't find I just need to learn to keep my mouth shut and let him do his thing particularly inspiring. I don't think this is the, oh my god, #couple goals that they thought it was. If someone made me feel like the one thing I needed to learn to do was learn to keep my mouth shut, then I would be getting the hell out of there as soon as possible. This worries me. Chapter 19 is saving sex for marriage worth it? They write, I'm telling you, sex is worth the wait. No, you might not orgasm the first time you have sex, and honestly you might think to yourself, wait, this is what I waited all these years for? I don't know which one of them wrote this, but they're really telling on themselves, aren't they? Here's the thing, sex is a learning process. Absolutely, I thoroughly agree. And there's no reason you can't enjoy that learning process with one person or multiple people if that's what's right for you. You go at your own pace, with your own standards, what you want. You do it with as few or as many people as you want, or none at all. That is all okay. It's fine. It's something you do for the rest of your life with your spouse. You'll have plenty of time to figure out all the little details. Sex is worth waiting for until marriage for several reasons. And I'm sure it is for some people, but it doesn't have to be for everyone. Not at all. Saving sex until marriage has also been absolute hell for some people, and for some of us, not waiting has been the best decision we ever made. Great. I'm glad Paul is happy that he waited, and I'm sorry for Morgan that she regrets not waiting, but theirs is absolutely not the only experience, not by a long shot. So I actually follow this like Christian marriage advice subreddit, because one, it's always interesting to see things from a different perspective, and two, it kind of helps and inspires videos that I make and stuff, and it helps me understand some of the people that I sometimes talk about in videos. But one thing I find interesting is there are so many people on there who talk about how they do regret waiting until marriage. There's also plenty of people who talk about how they're like, yes, so glad I waited, this is wonderful. But there's also a lot of people on the other side too. It really isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. And I know from my own experience, I have absolutely no regrets about not waiting. None at all. And I think that's what Paul and Morgan miss. Instead of just pushing one teaching and say, this was our experience, so you have to do this too, I think they need to realise that each person is different and not everything is going to be right for every single person. You need to figure out what you want, when you want it, and why, and then just go with what's best for you, that's all. Some might argue sex is just a physical thing. No. Some might argue sex can be just a physical thing. It's a subtle but important difference. Different people will see sex differently at different times with different people, and that's okay. It really, really is. Sex can be a physical thing. Sex can be an emotional thing. Sex can be a spiritual thing. Sex can be all and none of these things, and that's okay. Some might argue sex is just a physical thing. No, it's not. Sorry, they're completely and totally wrong. Sex is a physical, spiritual, and emotional action. Again, no, it can be each or all of none of those things. It's a ceremony where two people become one. It is intimate and should be done with one person for the rest of your life. To those people who claim that it's just a physical act, I feel truly saddened for you, because it's clear that the world and the enemy have truly gotten to you and your mind, having made something so special and beautiful so mundane and cheap. Actually, no, I feel sorry for you, because I don't think you understand the amazing diversity of experiences you can have with another person or people. Just because something is just physical, that doesn't make it mundane or cheap. It doesn't make it bad. It can still be lovely. And it absolutely doesn't lessen the experience of when you do have that amazing, beautiful, romantic, loving moment with someone where you feel a connection with them. You can have just physical sex, and you can have emotional sex, and you can have both of those experiences with the same people or different people. There's not just one experience to it, and it's beautiful and diverse and lovely and exciting, and it's a great experience, and there's nothing mundane or cheap about it, you know? I feel sorry for you. I also take a bit of an issue with this section because it feels incredibly disrespectful to asexual people. It feels like they're implying that if you want to have this kind of intimate connection with someone and become one and have a spiritual and emotional connection and bond and all this stuff, then you have to have sex. And that's just not true at all. Plenty of asexual people experience these kinds of connections without it being through sex. Paul and Morgan just have such a narrow view of the human experience. But hey, at least they aren't being overtly homophobic here for once, so that's a good thing. I am shocked by how little homophobia and transphobia is in this book. I'm very glad it's not in here, but it surprises me because we know what they're like. They write, you're going to see the naked body of the person you have sex with. Not always, maybe just parts of them. Every nook and cranny. You'll get the image of their naked body ingrained in your mind for a very long time, if not forever. Not always. You'll have the memories of doing a very intimate thing in your mind. Then say you guys break up and you end up marrying someone totally different. Again, not always. My memory isn't that good. I can barely remember what I had for dinner last week, never mind someone I slept with 10 years ago. Although I absolutely believe God can and will break soul ties, you're just adding an extra back, an extra issue, an extra problem to be solved in your marriage that will already be a brand new challenge for you to work on daily. Why do that to yourself and your spouse? Save yourself from the pain, the drama, and added frustration and struggle. I don't think there's any problem or challenge or frustration with having had sex before. Like, as long as the people in your past are in the past, what's the problem? Now, if you still have one of those people hanging around and interfering with the relationship, that's different. But just having a past isn't a problem for everyone. It's really not an issue. They continue their sexist, shameful outside marriage content with the very last and very bizarre chapter titled, Are we allowed to talk about sex before marriage? And if so, how? When you're talking to your boyfriend or girlfriend about sex, you want to be wise and proceed with caution. Yeah, be wise and proceed with caution. I think my dungeon master said that to me last time I played Dungeons & Dragons. There's no need to go into details or talk about sex regularly. I disagree, but we'll get into the why in a moment. However, we do think there are benefits to talking about sex. One occasion for this is during the conversation on setting boundaries. Talk about how you're going to make sure sex is saved for marriage. As the wedding day approaches, talk about your expectations. Talk about your nerves. Ask questions if you need to, but keep the conversation from going so far that you have regrets if the wedding was called off. This feels like a very bizarre warning. It should be absolutely normal to talk about sex with a partner or potential partner and not something you should ever be ashamed of. Even if you aren't ready to have sex yet, there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed about talking about it, talking about what you eventually think you'll be comfortable with or not comfortable with. Being able to say things like sex, vagina, penis out loud without it being a taboo topic is a very, very important part of knowing you're mature enough to have a relationship with someone. If you're considering a physical relationship with someone, whether that's casual or more serious, doesn't matter, you should absolutely be able to openly talk about it all without shame, embarrassment, or guilt. You need to be able to say to your partner, I'm comfortable with you doing X. I would like you to do X. I would not like you to do X. You shouldn't need to skate around it or use code words or be like, put your thing there and my thing. Being able to say to your partner, let's say you are waiting until marriage, being comfortable enough to say to your partner, hey, when we're married, I would be comfortable if we only did X, Y, and Z on the wedding night and waited to do A, B, and C until, you know, a few weeks, months in, whatever. Being able to talk openly like that is not sinful at all. They say a lot of the time these conversations about sex will be held in premarital counselling, which is nice because you have someone there asking the questions, guiding the conversation, and making sure it doesn't go further than necessary. There's this really weird fear. It's like they treat it like Bloody Mary, you know? You say sex 3 times and a wild penis appears to penetrate you both. That's not how it works. You should be able to have adult conversations about setting boundaries and what you're comfortable with without that being something you feel guilty about, without worrying, oops, his penis might slip into me if I say the word blowjob. You know what I mean? They say, we just want to caution you guys to be very careful with how often it's brought up, where and when it's brought up, and where your conversation goes when you talk about it. It's one thing to have a conversation about expectations that you have when it comes to sex. It's a whole other thing to start getting carried away and talking about things you want to try, fantasies you have in mind, etc. That easily leads to us lusting after one another. Be careful. They're right, you know. How dare you treat sex as something fun and enjoyable? How dare you feel lust for your partner or fiancé? Disgraceful, disgusting, no. And that's it, that's the end of the book. Overall, I would say this book felt a lot less like a guide to dating intentionally and more of just like a list of all the criticisms people had about our relationship and why they're wrong, because these are bad things, but just not when we do them. The complaints about Morgan not being a virgin when she met Paul, there was a whole bit about Paul's parents not liking Morgan at first, Paul not saying he loved her back, Morgan being upset that Paul wasn't showing any affection, and so on. And I'll be honest, like, no one has a perfect relationship, but Paul and Morgan sometimes seem genuinely miserable with each other, just so often. And it's weird to me because social media is such an odd thing, because you can edit it. You only show certain bits of your life on it. The most entertaining bits, or the most exciting bits, or the most polished bits. But most of what we see with Paul and Morgan are the bad bits. Paul talking down to her, Morgan annoying Paul, them bickering, them full-on arguing, both of them complaining and being miserable, Morgan refusing to communicate properly with Paul. Both of them talked about how hard and difficult marriage is, and that's about it. You don't really see any of the good stuff.
Guys, you see us in our videos. We have fun together.
There have been times when I've done something or said something to Morgan that's been so hurtful, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, it's nice knowing that she can't go anywhere.
Okay, that doesn't give you the right to say mean things
I
to your
feel
wife.
guilty about it. If there wasn't that commitment, you say stuff and heart cracked down the middle, you go your own ways. With marriage, you're gonna mess up and do huge crappy things to each other, but we're not going anywhere. The first thing I knew about, I wish I had known about sex, was this. Okay. Don't expect your sex, once you get married, don't expect the sexiness and the adventuresome, crazy, awesome stuff to go from 0 to 100 right out of the gate. Realize that is going to take some time, and if I had realized that before getting married, I wouldn't have brought out the whipped cream on our honeymoon. It was a bad idea. It made Morgan cry. But in all reality, in my mind, it was, I'm finally married. Now I welcome everything in the kitchen sink into our sex life. Let's go wild. And Morgan's like,
I'm like, bro, I barely know you. There are times when either Paul and I are maybe even making a video or talking to one another or another couple, and like we're like, oh, our sex, how's our sex life doing? I'm like, it's great. And Paul's like, well, it's good, but, and I'm like, wait, what? I thought we were good. I thought we were on the same page.
when you think you've communicated enough, communicate more.
Yes, so that really is just huge, 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 you guys.
You don't wake up every morning. Oh, kissy, kissy, mwah, mwah, mwah. No. Okay?
I wish we did.
And you don't fall asleep all cuddly, no.
I wish we did. I'd like to go to bed snuggling.
We do. Okay, no, we're not putting this in the video.
We need to work on this. All right, I hear what you're saying.
Just move on to something else. You just act like I never give you any loving. It's fine. We need to move on. It's fine.
We did not literally find any hope or closure to that little scenario.
So if following their intentional dating guide would end up with me having a relationship like theirs, then I would just rather not. That said, I am very aware that when I make these kinds of videos, I always try and say I try to critique the ideas and not the people. But I definitely struggle with that with Paul and Morgan because, as I mentioned earlier, I have my own personal issues and experiences, and it's really difficult for me to separate what I see with Paul and Morgan, and it's hard to separate them as people from the ideas they push because Paul's actions so often remind me of my abusive ex, and I think that definitely influences my feelings about them as people as well as their work. And some people aren't going to like that. They're going to be like, oh, well, you know, if you know you have a bias, don't talk about them. But ultimately, I'm not here to be like an objective news source. I'm here to share my opinions and my experiences. And I think as long as I'm not just going after them for the sake of it and targeting them unfairly and criticizing them for things just for the sake of it and like trying to pick out flaws, I think as long as I'm aware of my biases and try and keep them in check, it's still okay for me to share my opinion and try and make sure people can learn something from my experiences and from what they're putting out, you know? I don't know. Anyway, all that being said, Paul and Morgan's book is not the most harmful book of this kind that I've read. Not by a long shot. Gilda Fine's books are considerably worse. Anything by Ken Ham or Kent Hovind is considerably worse. The marriage guides by the Pearls are considerably worse, and so on. There's been like a whole host of bad books reviewed on this channel. That said, this one is easily one of the most boring and the most poorly written and the most low effort. Oh my god, I can't believe they're charging for this. There are still some harmful undertones to it, but mostly it's just kind of like a dull guide to having a mediocre at best marriage with someone you barely tolerate, and that's about it. I don't really have much more to say to it. Paul and Morgan's Guide to Intentional Dating, would not recommend. Don't waste your time with it. Definitely don't waste your money on it. Boom. Done. Okay. Oh, I'm very tired now, and I really need to eat some food. I said I was going to, and then I ended up filming another video. I've actually filmed 2 videos today. I said I was going to eat at the end of the last one, and I didn't. But I've ordered myself this, and oh my god, there's this place in Leeds that do these like Indian style burritos, but like wrapped in naan bread, and oh my god, they're amazing. I've ordered myself one of those as a treat because today is going to be a long day with lots of editing, lots of filming, lots of talking, obviously. So this should be here in a minute. I'm going to go eat that, and then we're going to edit, and in the meantime, I want you guys to let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments. What do you think of this book? What do you think of Paul and Morgan in general? What do you think about their concepts about dating? How would you correct any mis or bad information they put out in this book? Or do you think they have the right idea? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. But for now, thank you for watching. I will see you guys again really soon. If you're new here, please remember to subscribe, comment for engagement because it helps in other videos. If you like this, please feel free to share it around on social media. And I will see you guys again very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Hey all, just a little note from editing me and a little sleeping Kubi behind me. So as I mentioned in this video, I filmed 2 videos in this one day, but there's a few days in between like editing and putting them up and uploading it all. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm still exhausted. This is exactly the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, no, there was like a weird comment on my Little Mermaid video from someone who was like, oh, what's wrong with Rachel? Is she high? Is she hiding something? And it was like a whole thing. I was like, no, I'm just exhausted and I have my period, and there's my computer making noise. But you know, when I have my period, I get bad cramps and it just physically exhausts me, and I'm overworked and I'm tired and I'm sleeping a lot, and I was very hungry when I was filming as well, and I hadn't had time to eat that day. So that's what's wrong with me, for the people wondering. I'm tired, I had my period, and I was hungry. That's it. I think sometimes people forget that like women's bodies can just work against us, especially when you have bad periods like I do. They are physically draining, they're emotionally draining. I don't just get bad cramps, but I end up throwing up quite often. I get an upset tummy. It just like, even when I do eat, I can't keep it down. It's just an absolute nightmare. So if you ever see me off in videos, that's probably why. And just like now, I've been working like crazy. I've been barely sleeping because I've been editing and sorting things out, but my body's drained, and I need a couple of days off, which I'm gonna go and take now. But I mean, like, thank you for the concern, but also when you kind of read conspiracy theories about yourself, because that's what it felt like, you know, with the whole like, oh my god, is she high? It's a little concerning and worrying and scary, because like, you know me, I enjoy a glass of wine every now and again, but I'm not really, like, I don't touch drugs. That's not my scene. That's not who I am. Is it Coobs? You saying hi, baby? Yeah? Just ready to go out. So, yeah, while I appreciate the concern, I don't really appreciate people thinking I take drugs, or that I don't know what I would be hiding. I don't know what that meant, but point is, no, I'm just a bit tired and ill, is all. And now my Koobie's ready for a walk, aren't you, baby? Yes, you want to go walkies? Do you want to go walkies, gorgeous? Alright, I'm going to take the little one out. Thank you for watching, and now my video is pretty much done. I'm going to export and go take a very, very long nap. I'll see you all again soon.